The autumn rain drummed against the windshield as Marcus Sullivan pulled into the parking lot of the Mountain View Animal Shelter. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the steering wheel, the same tremor that had plagued him since returning from Afghanistan 3 years ago. The doctors called it a residual effect of his traumatic brain injury, a souvenir from the IED that had ended his military career and stolen chunks of his memory like a thief in the night. He sat in his truck for several minutes, watching the steady stream of raindrops blur his view of the modest brick building ahead. The therapist had suggested a companion animal might help with his PTSD symptoms, but Marcus had resisted for months. The idea of being responsible for another living being when he could barely take care of himself seemed absurd. Yet here he was finally ready to take that step. The shelter's interior smelled of disinfectant and hope, a peculiar combination that reminded him of military hospitals. A young volunteer named Sarah greeted him with an enthusiastic smile that reminded him of his sister before the war had changed everything. "Are you looking for anything specific?" she asked, leading him past kennels filled with barking dogs of every size and breed. "Something calm," Marcus replied, his voice hoarse from disuse. "Maybe a larger dog. I've got space." They walked past countless eager faces pressed against chain-link gates until they reached the back section of the shelter. Here the atmosphere was different, quieter, more subdued. These were the long-term residents, the ones with special needs or difficult histories. "This is our senior and special needs section," Sarah explained softly. "These guys need a little extra patience, but they often make the most loyal companions." That's when Marcus saw him. The German shepherd lay motionless in the corner of his kennel, his once proud head resting on massive paws. Grey had begun to thread through his black and tan coat, and several scars crisscrossed his body like a roadmap of old battles. But it was his eyes that stopped Marcus cold. Deep brown eyes that held a weight of experience, of loss, of memories too heavy for any creature to carry alone. "What's his story?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's expression grew somber. "That's Rex. He's about 9 years old, came to us 6 months ago when his handler died. Military working dog, deployed multiple times overseas. He's been difficult to place. People want puppies, you know. Plus he has some behavioral issues, anxiety, nightmares. Sound familiar?" Marcus nodded, unable to look away from the dog. Rex hadn't moved, hadn't even acknowledged their presence, yet something about him called to Marcus in a way he couldn't explain. A recognition, perhaps. Two warriors forgotten by the world that had once needed them desperately. "Can I meet him?" Sarah hesitated. "He doesn't warm up to people easily. The last 3 potential adopters left pretty quickly. Rex can be intense. I'd like to try." The kennel door opened with a metallic clang that made both Marcus and Rex flinch simultaneously. Marcus entered slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. He'd worked with military dogs before the injury, though those memories existed in fragments, like pieces of a puzzle with half the pieces missing. Rex lifted his head slightly, studying Marcus with those ancient eyes. For several minutes, neither moved. Then slowly Marcus lowered himself to the concrete floor, sitting cross-legged just out of reach. "Hey there, soldier," he said quietly. "I know how it feels." The German shepherd's ears twitched at the word soldier. He shifted slightly, still wary but no longer completely withdrawn. Marcus remained perfectly still, letting Rex make the choice. Time seemed suspended in that concrete kennel, 2 broken souls taking measure of each other. After what felt like an hour but was probably only 15 minutes, Rex rose to his feet with the careful movements of an aging warrior. He approached. Marcus stepped by cautious step until he was close enough to smell him. The dog's nose worked overtime, processing scents and information in ways humans could never comprehend. Then, something extraordinary happened. Rex's entire body language changed. His tail, which had remained motionless since Marcus arrived, gave the slightest wag. The dog moved closer, close enough for Marcus to see the intelligence and pain swirling in those chocolate eyes. Marcus extended, his hand slowly palm up, letting Rex sniff his fingers. The contact when it came was electric. Rex nuzzled Marcus's hand with surprising gentleness, and Marcus felt tears he'd been holding back for 3 years finally begin to fall. "I think," Marcus said to Sarah, who was watching from outside the kennel with barely concealed amazement. "I think we understand each other." The paperwork took an hour. Background checks, references, adoption fees, all the bureaucratic necessities that stood between broken souls and healing. Rex remained calm throughout the process, staying close to Marcus's side, as if he'd already made his choice about where he belonged. As they prepared to leave, Sarah handed Marcus a manila folder. "This is everything we have on Rex. Medical records, his deployment history, what little we know about his service. The previous owner's daughter dropped it off with him, thought his new family should know what he'd been through." Marcus tucked the folder under his arm, not ready to delve into Rex's past when he was still struggling with his own. They walked to his truck together, Rex moving with the measured gait of a dog who'd learned to conserve energy for when it truly mattered. The drive home was quiet, Rex lying on the bench seat beside Marcus with his head up, alert but calm. Marcus found himself stealing glances at his new companion, still hardly believing this was happening. For the first time in 3 years, he didn't feel completely alone. His house was a modest ranch on 2 acres outside of town, purchased with his disability settlement and chosen specifically for its isolation. Marcus had grown tired of people's pitying looks, their awkward attempts at gratitude for his service. Here he could exist without explanations or expectations. Rex explored the house methodically, nose to the ground, cataloguing scents and establishing his understanding of this new territory. Marcus watched him work, recognizing the thoroughness of a trained detection dog even in retirement. There was something both comforting and heartbreaking about watching this old soldier adapt to civilian life, a mirror of his own struggles. That evening, as Marcus sat on his back porch with a cup of coffee, Rex settled beside him on the weathered wooden boards. The sun was setting through the pine trees, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Marcus felt something approaching peace. He opened Rex's file, curious now about the history of his new companion. The pages contained typical veterinary records, vaccination schedules, and brief deployment summaries. Rex had served with distinction in Afghanistan, working primarily in explosive detection. His handler had been Staff Sergeant Elena Rodriguez, killed in action during her final deployment. Marcus's blood ran cold as he read that name, Elena Rodriguez. The letters swam before his eyes, and suddenly he was back in the desert, the acrid smell of smoke and cordite filling his nostrils. Voices shouted commands in the distance, and someone was screaming. "Rodriguez is down! Medic, medic!" The coffee cup slipped from his fingers, shattering against the porch boards. Rex was on his feet instantly, pressing against Marcus's legs, grounding him in the present. The flashback faded slowly, leaving Marcus gasping and disoriented. Elena Rodriguez. The name meant something important, but the harder he tried to grasp the memory, the more it slipped away like smoke. His damaged brain played these cruel games with him constantly, dangling fragments of his past, just close enough to see but too far to touch. Rex whined softly, pushing his massive head against Marcus's thigh. The dog's dark eyes held an expression Marcus couldn't quite read, but it seemed almost like recognition, as if Rex knew something that Marcus had forgotten. The night air had grown cold, but neither man nor dog moved from the porch. They sat, together in the gathering darkness, 2 veterans sharing the weight of memories too painful to fully remember and too important to completely forget. Marcus woke to the sound of whimpering. The bedside clock read 2:47 a.m., its red digits glowing, like eyes in the darkness. For a moment, he wasn't sure if the sounds were coming from Rex or from his own throat. His dreams had been particularly vivid tonight, filled with the familiar cocktail of desert heat, explosions, and faces he should remember but couldn't quite place. He found Rex in the living room, standing rigid before the fireplace mantel where Marcus kept his military memorabilia. The dog's hackles were raised, and he was staring intently at something on the shelf, releasing small anxious whines that cut through the silence like knives. "What is it, boy?" Marcus whispered, approaching slowly. He'd learned that sudden movements could trigger Rex's anxiety, just as they did his own. Rex didn't acknowledge him. The dog's entire focus was concentrated on the display of medals, ribbons, and photographs that Marcus had arranged there during a brief period when he'd thought displaying his service record might help him feel proud instead of broken. Now the collection mostly served as a reminder of everything he couldn't remember about his time overseas. As Marcus drew closer, Rex began to bark, sharp, urgent sounds that seemed to carry a message Marcus couldn't decode. The dog's behavior was unlike anything he'd shown since coming home from the shelter. This wasn't the general anxiety of a traumatized animal. This was specific, targeted, almost accusatory. "Rex, easy," Marcus said, reaching out to comfort the agitated dog. But as his hand approached Rex's head, the German shepherd spun around and fixed Marcus with a stare so intense it made him step backward. In that moment, looking into Rex's eyes, Marcus felt something shift in his brain, like tumblers falling into place in a lock he hadn't known existed. The room seemed to tilt slightly, and suddenly he was elsewhere, else when the Afghan sun beat down mercilessly as Marcus checked his equipment one final time. Beside him, Staff Sergeant Elena Rodriguez was giving Rex a final pat, her gloved hands gentle despite the tactical gear that made her look like a warrior from the future. "Ready for another milk run, partner?" she asked Rex, who responded with a subtle tail wag. The closest thing to enthusiasm the professional working dog ever displayed on duty. Marcus remembered thinking how Eleanor and Rex moved like extensions of each other, a partnership forged in the crucible of combat and refined through countless missions. Rex would detect the explosives, Elena would mark them for disposal, and Marcus, what had Marcus been doing there? The memory fractured, images spinning like shards of broken glass. Voices calling out coordinates, the acrid smell of burning fuel. Eleanor's voice, urgent now. "Something's wrong, Marcus. The intel was bad. This isn't—" And then fire, so much fire. Marcus crashed back to the present, gasping as if he'd been holding his breath underwater. Rex was still staring at him, but the dog's expression had changed. The accusatory intensity had been replaced by something that looked almost like hope. "Elena," Marcus whispered, and Rex's ears perked up at the name. "You remember Elena?" Rex approached him slowly, pressing his massive head against Marcus's legs in a gesture that felt like comfort and confirmation combined. Marcus buried his hands in the dog's thick fur, feeling the solid warmth of a living creature who had shared his loss, even if he couldn't fully remember what that loss was. The rest of the night passed in fragments. Marcus would doze fitfully, only to wake and find Rex still alert, still watching. Sometimes the dog would move to different parts of the house as if patrolling or searching for something. When Marcus followed, he noticed that Rex seemed particularly interested in his bedroom closet, where a duffel bag from his final deployment sat untouched since his return. By morning, both of them were exhausted, but something had fundamentally changed between them. The tentative bond of the previous day had deepened into something more complex, a shared recognition of loss, and a mutual understanding that they were both carrying pieces of a puzzle neither could solve alone. Marcus made coffee with shaking hands, his mind churning through the fragments of memory that had surfaced during the night. Elena Rodriguez. The name was attached to emotions so intense they made his chest tight, but the details remained frustratingly elusive. Had they been friends, colleagues, something more? Rex watched him from across the kitchen, those intelligent eyes tracking every movement. There was something almost human in the dog's expression, as if he was trying to communicate something vital but lacked the words. "What do you know that I don't, boy?" Marcus asked, setting down a bowl of water for Rex. "What happened over there?" The question hung in the air between them, unanswered but not unacknowledged. Rex approached the water bowl but didn't drink. Instead, he sat beside it and let out a single mournful howl that seemed to contain all the grief of the world. The sound raised goosebumps on Marcus's arms and sent a chill down his spine. It was the cry of a creature who had witnessed something terrible, something that human minds couldn't fully process, but that would live forever in the perfect, unforgiving memory of a dog. Marcus knelt beside Rex, running his hands through the dog's coat, feeling for the first time the full extent of the scars that marked his body. Some were clearly surgical, precise lines where veterinarians had worked to save his life. Others were rougher, the kind of wounds that came from explosions and flying debris. "We both made it out," Marcus murmured, "but we left pieces of ourselves back there, didn't we?" Rex leaned into his touch, and Marcus felt a connection form between them that went beyond the typical bond between human and dog. They were survivors of the same trauma, even if only one of them could fully remember what that trauma had been. As the morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows, Marcus made a decision. The duffel bag in his closet had remained unopened since his return, sealed away along with everything else from his final deployment. His therapists had respected his reluctance to revisit that time, focusing instead on coping strategies and moving forward. But Rex's presence changed everything. The dog clearly remembered things that Marcus had lost, and perhaps together they could piece together what had happened to Elena Rodriguez and why her memory triggered such profound responses in both of them. Marcus stood up, Rex immediately, rising to follow him. They walked through the house together toward the bedroom, where the duffel bag waited like a time bomb filled with memories instead of explosives. At the closet door, Marcus hesitated. Rex sat beside him, patient but alert, as if he understood the significance of this moment. "Rodriguez is down, medic, medic!" The coffee cup slipped from his fingers, shattering against the porch boards. Rex was on his feet instantly, pressing against Marcus's legs, grounding him in the present. The flashback faded slowly, leaving Marcus gasping and disoriented. Elena Rodriguez. The name meant something important, but the harder he tried to grasp the memory, the more it slipped away like smoke. His damaged brain played these cruel games with him constantly, dangling fragments of his past, just close enough to see but too far to touch. Rex whined softly, pushing his massive head against Marcus's thigh. The dog's dark eyes held an expression Marcus couldn't quite read, but it seemed almost like recognition, as if Rex knew something that Marcus had forgotten. The night air had grown cold, but neither man nor dog moved from the porch. They sat, together in the gathering darkness, two veterans sharing the weight of memories too painful to fully remember and too important to completely forget. Marcus woke to the sound of whimpering. The bedside clock read 2:47 a.m., its red digits glowing, like eyes in the darkness. For a moment he wasn't sure if the sounds were coming from Rex or from his own throat. His dreams had been particularly vivid tonight, filled with the familiar cocktail of desert heat, explosions, and faces he should remember but couldn't quite place. He found Rex in the living room, standing rigid before the fireplace mantel, where Marcus kept his military memorabilia. The dog's hackles were raised, and he was staring intently at something on the shelf, releasing small anxious whines that cut through the silence like knives. "What is it, boy?" Marcus whispered, approaching slowly. He'd learned that sudden movements could trigger Rex's anxiety, just as they did his own. Rex didn't acknowledge him. The dog's entire focus was concentrated on the display of medals, ribbons, and photographs that Marcus had arranged there during a brief period when he'd thought displaying his service record might help him feel proud instead of broken. Now the Yao collection mostly served as a reminder of everything he couldn't remember about his time overseas. As Marcus drew closer, Rex began to bark, sharp, urgent sounds that seemed to carry a message Marcus couldn't decode. The dog's behavior was unlike anything he'd shown since coming home from the shelter. This wasn't the general anxiety of a traumatized animal. This was specific, targeted, almost accusatory. "Rex, easy," Marcus said, reaching out to comfort the agitated dog. But as his hand approached Rex's head, the German shepherd spun around and fixed Marcus with a stare so intense it made him step backward. In that moment, looking into Rex's eyes, Marcus felt something shift in his brain, like tumblers falling into place in a lock he hadn't known existed. The room seemed to tilt slightly, and suddenly he was elsewhere, else when the Afghan sun beat down mercilessly as Marcus checked his equipment one final time. Beside him, Staff Sergeant Elena Rodriguez was giving Rex a final pat, her gloved hands gentle despite the tactical gear that made her look like a warrior from the future. "Ready for another milk run, partner?" she asked Rex, who responded with a subtle tail wag. The closest thing to enthusiasm the professional working dog ever displayed on duty. Marcus remembered thinking how Elena and Rex moved like extensions of each other, a partnership forged in the crucible of combat and refined through countless missions. Rex would detect the explosives, Elena would mark them for disposal, and Marcus, what had Marcus been doing there? The memory fractured, images spinning like shards of broken glass. Voices calling out coordinates, the acrid smell of burning fuel. Elena's voice, urgent now. "Something's wrong, Marcus. The intel was bad. This isn't—" And then fire, so much fire. Marcus crashed back to the present, gasping as if he'd been holding his breath underwater. Rex was still staring at him, but the dog's expression had changed. The accusatory intensity had been replaced by something that looked almost like hope. "Elena," Marcus whispered, and Rex's ears perked up at the name. "You remember Elena?" Rex approached him slowly, pressing his massive head against Marcus's legs in a gesture that felt like comfort and confirmation combined. Marcus buried his hands in the dog's thick fur, feeling the solid warmth of a living creature who had shared his loss, even if he couldn't fully remember what that loss was. The rest of the night passed in fragments. Marcus would doze fitfully, only to wake and find Rex still alert, still watching. Sometimes the dog would move to different parts of the house, as if patrolling or searching for something. When Marcus followed, he noticed that Rex seemed particularly interested in his bedroom closet, where a duffel bag from his final deployment sat untouched since his return. By morning, both of them were exhausted, but something had fundamentally changed between them. The tentative bond of the previous day had deepened into something more complex, a shared recognition of loss and a mutual understanding that they were both carrying pieces of a puzzle neither could solve alone. Marcus made coffee with shaking hands, his mind churning through the fragments of memory that had surfaced during the night. Elena Rodriguez. The name was attached to emotion so intense they made his chest tight, but the details remained frustratingly elusive. Had they been friends? Colleagues? Something more? Rex watched him from across the kitchen, those intelligent eyes tracking every movement. There was something almost human in the dog's expression, as if he was trying to communicate something vital, but lacked the words. "What do you know that I don't, boy?" Marcus asked, setting down a bowl of water for Rex. "What happened over there?" The question hung in the air between them, unanswered but not unacknowledged. Rex approached the water bowl but didn't drink. Instead, he sat beside it and let out a single mournful howl that seemed to contain all the grief of the world. The sound raised goosebumps on Marcus's arms and sent a chill down his spine. It was the cry of a creature who had witnessed something terrible, something that human minds couldn't fully process, but that would live forever in the perfect, unforgiving memory of a dog. Marcus knelt beside Rex, running his hands through the dog's coat, feeling for the first time the full extent of the scars that marked his body. Some were clearly surgical, precise lines where veterinarians had worked to save his life. Others were rougher, the kind of wounds that came from explosions and flying debris. "We both made it out," Marcus murmured, "but we left pieces of ourselves. Get back there, didn't we?" Rex leaned into his touch, and Marcus felt a connection form between them that went beyond the typical bond between human and dog. They were survivors of the same trauma, even if only one of them could fully remember what that trauma had been. As the morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows, Marcus made a decision. The duffel bag in his closet had remained unopened since his return, sealed away along with everything else from his final deployment. His therapists had respected his reluctance to revisit that time, focusing instead on coping strategies and moving forward. But Rex's presence changed everything. The dog clearly remembered things that Marcus had lost, and perhaps together they could piece together what had happened to Elena Rodriguez and why her memory triggered such profound responses in both of them. Marcus stood up, Rex immediately, rising to follow him. They walked through the house together toward the bedroom, where the duffel bag waited like a time bomb filled with memories instead of explosives. At the closet door, Marcus hesitated. Rex sat beside him, patient but alert. As if he understood the significance of this moment, Marcus's heart was racing now. "What kind of questions?" Before Agent Chen could answer, the door opened and two uniformed military police officers entered. "Ma'am, we're ready to transport the animal to the containment facility." "Wait." Marcus stood up so quickly his chair scraped against the floor. "Transport him where? You can't take Rex. He's my dog now. I adopted him." "Mr. Sullivan, after what happened today, the animal needs to be evaluated by military veterinary behaviorists. There are protocols. He's not property of the military." "Anymore?" Marcus's voice cracked with desperation. "Rex was legally adopted through a civilian shelter. You can't just take him." Agent Chen's expression was sympathetic but firm. "Actually, Mr. Sullivan, we can. Military working dogs retain certain classifications even after retirement, especially when their behavior suggests potential security issues." Marcus watched in horror as the MPs approached Rex with a restraint pole. The dog didn't resist. His training was too ingrained for that, but his eyes never left Marcus's face. The trust and hope Marcus had seen there over the past few days was being replaced by something that looked like betrayal. "This is wrong," Marcus said desperately. "Rex isn't dangerous. He was trying to tell us something. About Morrison. About what happened over there. What do you remember about what happened over there, Mr. Sullivan?" Agent Chen asked quietly. Marcus closed his eyes, trying to grasp the fragments that kept slipping away like smoke. There was an operation. Elena Rodriguez was there. She was Rex's handler. Something went wrong. The intel was bad, or... He opened, his eyes looking directly at Agent Chen. "Elena died, didn't she? That's why Rex was at the shelter." "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was killed in action during Operation Desert Echo, yes. You were there when it happened." The room seemed to tilt around. Marcus. Operation Desert Echo. The words hit him like a physical blow, and suddenly he could smell cordite and burning fuel, could hear Elena's voice calling out warnings that came too late. "I need to remember," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Rex remembers something I can't. That's why he reacted to Morrison." Agent Chen closed her portfolio. "Mr. Sullivan, I'm going to recommend that you be admitted for observation while we sort this out. Your medical team thinks the stress of today's events may have triggered some psychological responses that need to be monitored." "You mean you're locking me up?" "I mean we're making sure you get the help you need while we investigate what happened today." Marcus watched helplessly as the MPs led Rex away. The dog looked back once, and Marcus saw something in those brown eyes that broke his heart. Rex understood this was another betrayal, another abandonment by the humans he'd served faithfully. "Wait," Marcus called out, and Rex's ears perked up. "I'll find you, boy, I promise. Whatever happened over there, we'll figure it out together." Rex's tail gave the slightest wag before he disappeared around the corner, leaving Marcus alone with Agent Chen and the weight of memories he couldn't quite grasp. "Mr. Sullivan," Agent Chen said gently, "is there anything else you can tell me about General Morrison? Anything at all?" Marcus sank back into his chair, exhaustion washing over him like a tide. "I keep seeing Elena's face. She was scared. Really, scared, and she kept saying something was wrong with the intel." He looked up at Agent Chen. "Morrison was in charge of intelligence for that region, wasn't he?" Agent Chen didn't answer directly, but Marcus saw the confirmation in her eyes. "Rex knows," Marcus said with sudden certainty. "Whatever happened to Elena, whatever went wrong. With Operation Desert Echo, Rex was there. He saw it all, and he recognized Morrison today. Dogs don't make reliable witnesses, Mr. Sullivan. This one does." Marcus leaned forward, meeting Agent Chen's gaze. "Elena trained him to detect explosives, but she also trained him to recognize threats. Rex was trying to warn everyone today. The question is, what kind of threat is General Morrison?" Agent Chen stood to leave, pausing at the door. Yet, "Mr. Sullivan, I want you to think very carefully about what you remember from that deployment. Even fragments could be important. When you're ready to talk, I'll be here." After she left, Marcus was alone with his fractured memories and the echo of Rex's departing whine. He closed his eyes and tried to piece together the fragments. Elena's voice full of fear and urgency. The smell of burning fuel. Morrison's name being spoken in tones of anger and betrayal. And underneath it all, the certainty that Rex held the key to a truth that someone had worked very hard to bury. In the distance, He could hear the sound of a dog howling, mournful, urgent, and filled with the weight of memories that refused to stay buried. Sarah Martinez had been a veterinary technician at the Mountain View VA hospital for 6 years, long enough to know that the complex held secrets in its corners like dust. But she'd never seen anything quite like what happened at 3 in the morning on a Tuesday, when the German Shepherd being held in the secure kennel somehow managed to slip his restraints and disappear into the hospital grounds. The security cameras showed Rex moving through the corridors with purposeful determination, avoiding staff and navigating the building as if he'd memorized every turn during his brief stay. By the time the night shift discovered his empty kennel, he was already outside, working his way systematically across the hospital's landscaped grounds. Sarah found him just after dawn, digging frantically beneath an old oak tree in the memorial courtyard. The tree was part of the hospital's original construction, planted decades ago to honor fallen veterans, and Rex was attacking its root system with the focused intensity of a dog on a mission. "Hey there, big guy," Sarah called softly, not wanting to startle him. She'd worked with enough traumatized animals to recognize the signs of a dog operating on pure instinct. Rex paused in his digging, dirt covering his muzzle and paws, but he didn't run. Instead, he looked at Sarah with those intelligent brown eyes, and then back at the hole he'd been excavating, as if trying to communicate the importance of his work. Sarah approached slowly, keeping her body language non-threatening. As she drew closer, she could see that Rex hadn't been digging randomly. There was something buried beneath the tree, something that had caught his attention with the precision of a trained detection dog. "What did you find, boy?" Rex stepped back from the hole, allowing Sarah to see what had driven him to escape his confinement and seek out this specific spot. Partially buried in the dark earth, corroded by years of exposure but still recognizable, was a military dog tag. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She'd grown up in a military family, had seen enough dog tags to recognize their significance immediately. This one was tarnished and pitted, but she could still make out portions of the text etched into the metal. Rodriguez, Elena M. Staff Sergeant, U.S. Army. The rest was too corroded to read clearly, but the name alone was enough to make Sarah's hands shake as she carefully extracted the tag from the soil. Elena Rodriguez. She remembered Marcus Sullivan mentioning that name during his intake interview, remembered the way his voice had broken when he tried to explain why Rex had reacted so violently to General Morrison. Rex sat beside her as she examined the tag, his breathing heavy from exertion but his demeanor calmer now that his mission had been accomplished. He'd found what he'd been looking for, what some deep instinct or memory had told him was buried in this place. "How did you know?" Sarah whispered, scratching behind Rex's ears. "How did you know she was here?" The answer, of course, was that dogs never forgot scents that mattered to them. Elena Rodriguez had been Rex's partner, his handler, his pack leader. Even buried and corroded, her dog tag would carry traces of her scent, markers that Rex's superior nose could detect from yards away. But that raised another question. How had Elena's dog tag ended up buried beneath a tree at a VA hospital in Colorado when she'd been killed in action in Afghanistan? Sarah looked around the memorial courtyard, noting for the first time how isolated this particular tree was from the main pathways. Anyone could have approached it in the middle of the night without being observed. Anyone could have buried something, here knowing it would remain undisturbed beneath the roots of a memorial tree. Her phone buzzed with a text from the security supervisor. "K9 located?" Instead of responding immediately, Sarah took photos of the dog tag and the hole Rex had dug. Something about this felt important, felt like more than just a traumatized dog seeking comfort from a familiar scent. Rex had been trying to tell them something yesterday when he'd reacted to General Morrison, and now he'd led them to physical evidence that Elena Rodriguez had some connection to this place. "Sarah," a voice called from across the courtyard. She looked up to see Dr. Patricia Williams, the hospital's chief of veterinary services, approaching with 2 security guards. Sarah quickly slipped the dog tag into her pocket and stood up, positioning herself between Rex and the approaching group. "I found him here, Dr. Williams. He seems calm now." Dr. Williams studied the scene, the freshly dug hole, the dirt covering Rex's paws and muzzle, Sarah's protective stance. What was he doing? digging. I think he was looking for something. Did he find it? Sarah hesitated. Every instinct told her that Elena Rodriguez's dog tag was significant, that Rex had risked everything to uncover evidence that someone had wanted to stay buried. But she also knew that the wrong people learning about the tag too quickly could mean it would disappear forever. "I'm not sure," she said finally. "I scared him away from the hole when I approached." Dr. Williams nodded to the security guards, who moved forward with a restraint pole. Rex tensed but didn't resist as they secured him, his intelligence telling him that cooperation was his best chance of survival. As they led Rex away, he looked back at Sarah with an expression she would remember for the rest of her life. It wasn't the look of a defeated animal being dragged back to captivity. It was the look of a soldier who had completed his mission and trusted his ally to carry the intelligence forward. After they were gone, Sarah waited until she was sure she was alone, before pulling out her phone and scrolling through her contacts. She found the number she was looking for, Marcus Sullivan's emergency contact provided during his intake process. The phone rang 4 times before a gravelly voice answered. "Yeah? Mr. Sullivan? This is Sarah Martinez from the VA hospital. I was there when you brought Rex in for his appointment. Is Rex okay? They won't tell me anything about where they've taken him." Sarah looked down at the dog tag in her palm, feeling its weight and significance. "Mr. Sullivan, I need to see you. Rex found something. Something I think Sarah met Marcus at a 24-hour diner 15 miles from the hospital, far enough away to avoid surveillance cameras and curious ears. She'd chosen a corner booth where they could speak privately, though the weight of Elena Rodriguez's dog tag in her pocket made her feel like she was carrying a live grenade. Marcus looked haggard, his clothes wrinkled from sleeping in the hospital's family waiting room, where he'd maintained his vigil since Rex's disappearance. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his hands trembled slightly as he wrapped them around his coffee cup. "You said Rex found something," he said without preamble. Sarah glanced around the nearly empty diner before sliding the corroded dog tag across the table. Marcus's reaction was immediate and visceral. His face went white, and his hands began to shake so violently that coffee sloshed over the rim of his cup. "Elena," he whispered, his voice breaking on the name. "You recognize it?" Marcus picked up the tag with reverent care, his thumb tracing the barely legible letters. "She never took Saitov, said it was bad luck. I used to tease her about being superstitious, but she'd just laugh and say her grandmother gave it to her before her first deployment." The memories were coming faster now, triggered by the physical connection to his past. Sarah watched as Marcus's expression shifted from confusion to recognition to something approaching horror. "How is this possible?" he asked. "Elena died in Afghanistan. Her body was repatriated. I went to her funeral." He stopped, pressing his palms against his temples. "No, wait. I didn't go to her funeral. I was in the hospital. Brain surgery. I wanted to go, but they wouldn't let me travel." "Marcus, where exactly did Rex find this?" "Under the memorial tree in the hospital courtyard. He dug it up like he knew exactly where to look." Sarah leaned forward. "That tree was planted in 1987. It's been there since before the Afghanistan conflict even started. Someone buried Elena's tag there deliberately." Marcus stared at the tag, his mind working through the implications. Someone wanted it found eventually, or they wanted it hidden in plain sight, somewhere it would never be disturbed unless a dog with Elena's scent memory came looking for it. The silence stretched between them as the magnitude of the discovery settled in. Finally, Marcus looked up, his eyes clearer than Sarah had seen them since they'd met. "There's something else," he said. "When I was packing up Elena's gear after the incident, I noticed her tactical vest felt heavier than usual. At the time, I thought it was just the weight of loss, you know, but Rex kept sniffing at it, like he was trying to tell me something." "Do you still have the vest?" "It's in my duffel bag at home. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away, but I couldn't look at it either." Marcus stood up abruptly. "We need to check it. If Elena hid her dog tag for Rex to find, she might have left other messages." The drive to Marcus's house took 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. Sarah followed his truck down winding country roads, her mind racing with possibilities and implications. Elena Rodriguez had been a staff sergeant in military intelligence. She would have known how to hide evidence, how to leave breadcrumbs, for those who knew how to look. Marcus's house was exactly what Sarah had expected. Neat, isolated, and bearing the careful organization of a man trying to maintain control over a life that felt chaotic. Rex's presence was already evident in the form of new dog toys and a large bed positioned where a canine could watch both the front door and the kitchen. The duffel bag sat in Marcus's bedroom closet like a time capsule. With shaking hands, he unzipped it and began removing items: desert camouflage uniforms, personal hygiene items, photographs, and finally Elena's tactical vest. The vest was heavier than it should have been, weighted down by something that didn't belong in the standard equipment. Loadout. Marcus examined it methodically, his muscle memory returning, as he checked each pocket and compartment. Finally, his fingers found something unusual, a seam in the vest's lining that had been carefully opened and resealed. "Here," he said, working his fingernail under the loose stitching. Elena was good with a needle. She used to repair our gear in the field. The hidden pocket contained a small digital recording device, no bigger than a thumb drive, wrapped in plastic to protect it from moisture. Marcus stared at it like it was a snake that might bite him. "She left you a message," Sarah said softly. Marcus's hands were shaking too badly to operate the device, so Sarah took it and connected it to her phone. The file was corrupted. Years of storage in less than ideal conditions had taken their toll, but her phone's audio enhancement software managed to clean up enough of the signal to make it intelligible. Elena's voice filled the room, distorted by digital artifacts but unmistakably real. "Marcus, if you're hearing this, then something has happened to me and Rex found a way to get this to you. I hope to God I'm wrong about what I think is happening, but I can't take the chance of staying." Silent. The recording was interrupted by static, but Elena's voice returned, urgent now. Operation Desert Echo wasn't what we were told. The intelligence Morrison gave us was deliberately false. He sent us into a trap, Marcus. The insurgents were waiting. Forza, and they knew exactly where we'd be because Morrison told them. He's been selling information to the enemy for months. More static. Then Elena's voice again, barely above a whisper. "I found communications in Morrison's quarters. Names, locations, patrol routes, everything the insurgents needed to set up ambushes. He's been getting our people killed for money, Marcus. And when I confronted him about it, he said I was next on the list." The recording cut out for several seconds, then resumed with the sound of distant explosions in the background. "They're coming for us now. Morrison set up this mission to eliminate everyone who might know about his operation. If I don't make..." "Fight out," Rex will remember. "Dogs never forget the scent of betrayal. Take care of him, Marcus. He's the only witness left who can identify Morrison as a traitor." The file ended with the sound of Elena's voice calling out commands to Rex, followed by an explosion that made both Marcus and Sarah flinch. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus was crying now, tears streaming down his face as 3 years of suppressed memories crashed back into his consciousness. Sarah reached across and took his hand, grounding him in the present moment. She knew, Marcus said through his tears. Elena knew Morrison was dirty, and she died trying to expose him. That's why Rex reacted the way he did at the hospital. He recognized the man who betrayed his handler. "We have to take this to the authorities," Sarah said. "We have to get Rex back first," Marcus replied, his voice hardening with determination. Elena died protecting this information, and now they have the only witness who can corroborate her story, locked up where Morrison can get to him. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "You think Morrison knows Rex is at the hospital? I think Morrison has known exactly where Rex was from the moment he entered the civilian adoption system, and I think today's incident at the hospital means Rex's usefulness as a witness is about to become a liability." Marcus stood up, his military bearing returning as the fog of trauma and medication began to clear. "Elena trusted me to take care of Rex, and I've failed her once already. I won't do it again." "What are you going to do?" Marcus looked at the recording device in Sarah's hands, then at Elena's tactical vest, still warm from his touch. "I'm going to finish what Elena started. I'm going to expose Morrison for the traitor he is, and I'm going to make sure Rex gets the justice he's been trying to deliver for 3 years. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, and Sarah realized that the storm Elena Rodriguez had started, with her final recording, was about to break over everyone involved in the conspiracy that had killed her. The only question was whether Marcus and Rex would survive long enough to see. Morrison faced the consequences of his betrayal. The office of the Department of Defense Inspector General occupied an entire floor of a nondescript government building in Denver, its windows offering a view of mountains that reminded Marcus of the terrain where Elena had died. He sat across from Inspector General Robert Hayes, Elena's recording device and dog tag, arranged on the polished conference table between them like evidence in a trial that had been 3 years in the making. Inspector General Hayes was a career military officer whose weathered face spoke of decades spent investigating the kind of corruption that rotted institutions from within. He'd listened to Elena's recording twice, his expression growing darker with each revelation. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was working on an investigation when she died, Hayes said, consulting a thick file folder. Officially, it was listed as gathering intelligence on insurgent activities in the Chapman sector. Unofficially, she'd been flagged by our office as a potential whistleblower. Marcus felt his chest tighten. You knew Elena was investigating Morrison? We suspected. There had been an unusual number of successful ambushes in Morrison's area of operations. Patrol routes that should have been classified were somehow being anticipated by enemy forces. Good soldiers were dying because someone was feeding information to the other side. And you let Elena walk into a trap? Hayes's expression softened slightly. Mr. Sullivan, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez volunteered for the assignment that killed her. She knew the risks, but she also knew that without concrete evidence, Morrison would never face justice. She was trying to gather proof of his treachery when Operation Desert Echo went sideways. Marcus stared at the recording device, Elena's final words echoing in his memory. She found the proof, the communications in Morrison's quarters. Communications that were destroyed in the explosion that killed her. Until now, we had no way to corroborate her allegations. Hayes picked up the dog tag, studying its corroded surface. This changes things. Along with the recording, it establishes a clear chain of evidence that Rodriguez suspected Morrison and took steps to preserve that information. What about Rex? He was there. He witnessed everything. Hayes's expression became carefully neutral. Mr. Sullivan, while I appreciate the significance of the dog's behavior, military working dogs aren't considered reliable witnesses in formal proceedings. However, his reactions to Morrison do provide circumstantial support for Rodriguez's allegations. Marcus leaned forward, his hands clenched into fists. Rex isn't just a dog. He's a trained military professional who served 3 tours in Afghanistan. Elena taught him to recognize threats, and he identified Morrison as a threat the moment he saw him. That has to count for something. It does. But Morrison is a general officer with 30 years of distinguished service. Bringing charges against him will require more than a dog's reaction and a dying soldier's accusations. The frustration that had been building in Marcus for 3 years finally exploded. Elena died trying to expose him. She hid evidence knowing she might not survive to present it herself. How much more do you need? What do you need? Hayes raised a hand, his voice remaining calm despite Marcus's outburst. What I need, Mr. Sullivan, is for you to testify before a military tribunal about what you remember from Operation Desert Echo. With your testimony supporting Rodriguez's recording, we have grounds to reopen the investigation. Marcus felt his breath catch. I can't remember most of it. The TBI, what you can remember may be enough. Combined with the physical evidence Rodriguez left behind, your testimony could provide the corroboration we need to pursue charges. The thought of facing a military tribunal, of having his damaged memory dissected by lawyers and officers, terrified Marcus more than any firefight he'd survived in Afghanistan. But Elena's voice from the recording was clear in his mind, asking him to take care of Rex and finish what she'd started. When? He asked. Tomorrow. I've already convened an emergency session of the tribunal. Morrison doesn't know about the recording yet, but he knows something is developing. He's been making inquiries about the incident at the hospital, asking questions about your dog's current location. A chill ran down Marcus's spine. Where is Rex now? Hayes consulted his notes. Secured at the military veterinary facility at Peterson Air Force Base. He's safe, Mr. Sullivan. I made sure of that personally. I want to see him before the tribunal. That can be arranged. In fact, it might be beneficial. Sometimes familiar. Surroundings and companions can help with memory recovery in TBI cases. As they prepared to leave, Hayes paused at the door. Mr. Sullivan, you should know that General Morrison has been placed under surveillance pending the outcome of the tribunal. He's also been relieved of his current duties, though that information hasn't been made public yet. Marcus nodded, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and apprehension. After 3 years of Morrison walking free, while Eleanor's death went unquestioned, justice was finally within reach. But he also knew that cornered animals were the most dangerous, and Morrison had spent decades learning how to eliminate threats to his career. The drive to Peterson Air Force Base took 2 hours, time Marcus spent trying to organize his fragmented memories into something coherent enough to present to a tribunal. The recording had triggered a cascade of recollections, but they remained frustratingly incomplete. Flashes of images and sounds that felt real, but lacked the context to make them meaningful. Rex was being held in a climate-controlled kennel, facility that looked more like a medical research lab than a traditional animal shelter. When Marcus saw him through the observation window, his heart nearly broke. The proud military working dog had been reduced to a dejected prisoner, lying, motionless on a sterile floor with his head resting on his paws. He hasn't eaten much since he arrived, the veterinary technician explained. Classic signs of depression and separation anxiety. Military working dogs form incredibly strong bonds with their handlers. When those bonds are broken, they often shut down emotionally. Marcus was allowed into the kennel area, and Rex's transformation was immediate. The dog's head shot up, his tail began wagging, and he approached Marcus with the closest thing to joy that his professional demeanor would allow. "Hey there, soldier," Marcus said, kneeling down to scratch behind Rex's ears. "I'm sorry I let them take you away. I'm going to make it right." Rex leaned into Marcus's touch, and for a moment they were just a man and his dog finding comfort in each other's presence. But then Rex pulled back slightly and did something extraordinary. He began to paw at Marcus's jacket pocket, the same pocket where Marcus had placed Elena's dog tag. "You smell her, don't you?" Marcus whispered. "You remember Elena?" Rex's response was to sit at attention and let out a single sharp bark, the kind of alert bark a military working dog used to signal the detection of an explosive device. Marcus felt his breath catch as the memory surfaced with crystal clarity. Elena's voice sharp with alarm. "Rex is indicating multiple devices, Marcus. This whole area is wired to blow. We need to get out of here now," Morrison's voice crackling over the radio. "Negative. You have your orders. Complete the sweep and report." Back. Elena's response barely controlled panic. "Sir, with respect, my dog is telling me we're walking into a kill zone. We need immediate extraction." Morrison's final transmission. "Radio discipline, Sergeant. Complete your mission." The memory hit Marcus like a physical blow, and he staggered backward. Rex was instantly at his side, pressing against his legs in the same way he'd comforted Elena during her final moments. "He knew," Marcus said aloud, his voice echoing in the sterile kennel facility. Morrison knew exactly what Rex would find, because he'd helped the insurgents place those devices. He sent us in there to die. Rex barked again, sharp and urgent, as if confirming Marcus's realization. The dog's dark eyes held an intelligence that went beyond normal canine cognition, the look of a professional who had been waiting 3 years for someone to finally understand his testimony. Marcus knelt down and looked directly into Rex's eyes. "Tomorrow we're going to tell them what really happened. Elena's going to get her justice, and Morrison is going to pay for what he did to all of us." Rex's tail wagged once, a gesture of acknowledgement between soldiers who had finally found their way back to the same mission. Outside the kennel facility, thunder rumbled across the Colorado plains, and Marcus realized that the storm Elena had predicted in her final recording was about to break at last. The only question was whether he and Rex would have the strength to weather it together. The military tribunal convened at 800 hours in a secure conference room at Peterson Air Force Base. Marcus had spent the night in base guest quarters, his sleep fractured by dreams of desert explosions and Elena's voice calling out warnings that no one would heed. Rex had been allowed to stay with him, and the dog's presence had been the only thing that kept Marcus's anxiety from spiraling completely out of control. The tribunal consisted of 3 general officers, a military prosecutor, and a defense attorney, representing Morrison's interests. Inspector General Hayes sat at a separate table, surrounded by boxes of evidence and legal documents. Morrison himself was notably absent. His attorney explained that the general was exercising his right to remain silent pending formal charges. Rex lay at Marcus's feet, professionally calm but alert to every person who entered the room. The dog's behavior had been carefully documented over the past 24 hours, and a military veterinary behaviorist was present to interpret his reactions for the tribunal. "Mr. Sullivan," the presiding general began, "you've been called to testify regarding your knowledge of Operation Desert Echo and the circumstances surrounding the death of Staff Sergeant Elena Rodriguez. Do you understand the significance of your testimony?" "Yes, sir." Marcus's voice was steadier than he'd expected. The return of his memories had brought clarity along with pain, and he found himself accessing the military bearing that had carried him through 3 deployments. Before we begin, I want to address the unusual nature of this proceeding. The presence of the military working dog Rex in this tribunal is unprecedented, but given his significance to the case, we've agreed to allow his participation as what we might call a living piece of evidence. Marcus glanced down at Rex, who was watching the proceedings with the focused attention of a professional observer. "Sir, with respect, Rex isn't just evidence, he's a witness. He was there when Elena died, and he's been trying to tell someone the truth about what happened for 3 years. The defense attorney, a sharp-faced colonel named Pierce, interjected, "Your Honor, while we sympathize with Mr. Sullivan's attachment to the animal, dogs cannot provide testimony in any legal sense. Any interpretation of the animal's behavior is purely speculative." Dr. Sarah Chen, the veterinary behaviorist, cleared her throat. "If I may, Your Honor, while military working dogs cannot testify in the traditional sense, their behavioral responses to specific stimuli can provide valuable information. Rex has been trained to detect threats and respond to them in predictable ways. His reactions to certain individuals should be considered as seriously as we would consider the alert behavior of a bomb detection dog." The presiding general nodded. "Noted. Mr. Sullivan, please tell us what you remember about Operation Desert Echo." Marcus began with the morning of the mission, describing the briefing Morrison had given them about suspected insurgent weapons caches in a remote village. His voice grew stronger as the memories became clearer, aided by Elena's recording and Rex's presence. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez expressed concerns about the intelligence from the beginning," Marcus testified. "Rex was agitated during the briefing, which Elena said usually meant he was detecting explosive residue on someone in the room. At the time, we assumed it was carryover from previous operations." "What happened when you reached the target area?" Marcus closed his eyes, allowing the memories to flow. Rex started alerting immediately, not just 1 or 2 indicators. He was going crazy, telling Elena that explosives were everywhere. Elena tried to radio for extraction, but Morrison ordered us to continue the sweep. As Marcus spoke, Rex's behavior began to change. The dog's ears pricked up, and he started to shift restlessly. Dr. Chen made notes, documenting the dog's response to the retelling of traumatic events. "Elena found something," Marcus continued. "In what should have been an empty building, she discovered communications equipment, radio transcripts showing coordination between someone with access to our patrol routes and insurgent forces. She photographed everything before." Marcus's voice broke as the final memories crashed back with overwhelming clarity. "Before the building exploded, Elena threw herself over Rex to protect him from the blast. She was dying when I reached her, but she managed to tell me that Morrison had been feeding information to the insurgents. She said Rex would remember, that dogs never forget betrayal." Rex rose to his feet, pacing in a small circle beside Marcus's chair. The dog's agitation was becoming more pronounced, as if the retelling of Elena's death was triggering his own traumatic memories. "What happened next, Mr. Sullivan?" Morrison arrived with the extraction team. He said Elena had been killed by insurgent booby traps, that the intelligence had been faulty. But Rex... Marcus looked down at his companion. Rex tried to attack Morrison right there in the field. It took 3 soldiers to restrain him. Morrison said the dog was traumatized and recommended he be retired from service. Colonel Pierce stood up. Your Honor, this is all very tragic, but it's also hearsay and speculation. Mr. Sullivan admits his memory was compromised by his injuries. How can we trust testimony from someone who acknowledges significant gaps in his recollection? Inspector General Hayes opened one of his evidence boxes and withdrew a tablet computer. If I may, Your Honor, we have corroborating evidence. The tablet displayed satellite imagery of the target village, time-stamped photographs from Eleanor's camera and communication intercepts that had been classified until Hayes's investigation uncovered them. The evidence painted a clear picture of an operation that had been compromised from the beginning. General Morrison had access to all patrol routes and mission parameters, Hayes explained. These intercepts show that insurgent forces were positioning themselves along Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's planned route hours before the operation commenced. Someone with detailed knowledge of the mission was feeding information to enemy forces. As Hayes presented the evidence, Rex's behavior became increasingly agitated. The dog began whining softly, his eyes fixed on the images of the village where Eleanor had died. Dr. Chen stood up and approached the tribunal. Your Honor, I'd like to request permission to conduct a demonstration. What kind of demonstration, Doctor? Dr. Chen gestured toward Rex. Military working dogs are trained to identify specific threats through scent recognition. If Rex truly recognizes General Morrison as the source of betrayal that led to his handler's death, he should react to Morrison's scent in a predictable way. Colonel Pierce objected immediately. This is highly irregular. You're asking us to base legal proceedings on a dog's reactions to smells? Actually, the presiding general said thoughtfully, we regularly use working dogs to detect explosives, drugs, and other contraband in legal proceedings. Their alerts are considered probable cause for searches and have been upheld by military courts. Dr. Chen, proceed with your demonstration. Dr. Chen produced several identical cloth samples, explaining that they had been exposed to personal items belonging to different individuals, including General Morrison. She placed them in a line on the floor and stepped back. Rex, Marcus said, quietly, search. The transformation in Rex was immediate and dramatic. The professional working dog emerged, his movements becoming precise and purposeful as he approached the cloth samples. He sniffed each one methodically, showing no reaction to the first 4 samples. When he reached the 5th sample, the one exposed to Morrison's scent, Rex's reaction was explosive. He backed away immediately, hackles raised, and began barking, with the same aggressive intensity he'd shown at the hospital. The sound echoed off the conference room walls like gunshots, and several tribunal members instinctively leaned back in their chairs. Threat, Marcus said, using the command word. Elena had taught Rex to identify dangerous individuals. Rex's barking became more urgent, more insistent, as if he was trying to warn everyone in the room about an imminent danger. The demonstration lasted only 30 seconds, but its impact was profound. When Dr. Chen removed Morrison's scent sample, Rex immediately calmed down, returning to his position beside Marcus's chair as if nothing had happened. The silence in the room was deafening. Finally, the presiding general spoke. In 30 years of military service, I've never seen anything quite like that. Dr. Chen, in your professional opinion, what did we just witness? Your Honor, we witnessed a military working dog identifying a specific individual as a threat based on scent recognition and conditioned response. Rex has been trained to recognize and alert to danger, and his reaction to General Morrison's scent indicates that he associates Morrison with the traumatic events that killed his handler. Colonel Pierce was on his feet again. This is still not testimony in any legal sense. The dog cannot explain his reasoning or be cross-examined. Inspector General Hayes stood up, his expression grim. Your Honor, while Rex cannot be cross-examined, General Morrison can be. Based on the evidence presented today, I am formally requesting that charges be filed against General Morrison for treason, conspiracy, and the murder of Staff Sergeant Elena Rodriguez. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Marcus felt Rex lean against his leg, the dog's warm presence a reminder that Elena's sacrifice had not been in vain. After 3 years of silence, the truth was finally being heard. The presiding general looked around the room, his gaze settling on Marcus and Rex. This tribunal will recess to consider the evidence presented. Mr. Sullivan, thank you for your testimony. And Rex. The general paused, seeming to search for appropriate words to address a dog who had just helped expose a traitor. Thank you for your service. As the tribunal members filed out, Marcus knelt beside Rex and scratched behind his ears. Elena would be proud, he whispered. We did it. Soldier, we finally did it. Rex's tail wagged once, a gesture of acknowledgement between warriors who had completed their mission at last. The recall to tribunal came at 1400 hours, just 6 hours after the morning session had concluded. Marcus had spent the time walking the base perimeter with Rex, both of them needing the physical activity to burn off the nervous energy that came with waiting for justice to be served. The dog seemed calmer now, as if the morning's demonstration had finally allowed him to deliver the testimony he'd been carrying for 3 years. When they returned to the conference room, the atmosphere had changed dramatically. Additional personnel had been added to the tribunal, officers from the Criminal Investigation Command, representatives from the Judge Advocate General's office, and a court reporter whose presence suggested that formal charges were imminent. General Morrison sat at the defense table for the first time, flanked by his attorney and a military aide. Marcus felt Rex tense beside him the moment Morrison entered the room, but the dog remained controlled, his training overriding his emotional response to the man who had betrayed his handler. Morrison looked older than he had at the hospital. Stress and sleepless nights had carved new lines around his eyes, and his usually immaculate uniform showed signs of hasty preparation. But his bearing remained that of a career officer accustomed to command, and when his gaze met Marcus's across the room, there was no hint of remorse or acknowledgement of wrongdoing. The presiding general called the session to order. After reviewing the evidence presented this morning, this tribunal has voted to recommend formal charges against General Morrison. However, before those charges are filed, General Morrison has requested the opportunity to make a statement. Colonel Pierce stood up. Your Honor, my client wishes to address the allegations that have been made against him. Morrison rose slowly, his movements deliberate and commanding despite the circumstances. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of 3 decades of military leadership. I have served this country faithfully for 31 years, he began. I have commanded troops in combat, made life-and-death decisions under impossible circumstances, and sacrificed my personal life for the greater good of our nation's security. The allegations being made against me today are not just false. They are an insult to every service member who has ever trusted me with their lives. Marcus felt his anger rising as Morrison continued his self-righteous speech, but Rex's presence beside him provided a grounding force. The dog's steady breathing and calm demeanor reminded Marcus that the truth had already been revealed. Everything else was just theater. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was a dedicated soldier who died in the line of duty, Morrison continued. To suggest that I somehow orchestrated her death is not only absurd, but deeply offensive to her memory and her service. As for the so-called evidence presented by Mr. Sullivan and this animal, Morrison's dismissive gesture toward Rex proved to be a critical error. At the word animal, spoken with clear contempt, Rex's ears flattened against his head and a low growl rumbled deep in his chest. The sound was barely audible, but everyone in the room felt its menace. Dr. Chen leaned forward, making notes on Rex's behavioral response. The subject is displaying signs of recognition and aggression specifically triggered by the defendant's voice patterns and dismissive tone, Morrison continued, apparently unaware of the effect his words were having on Rex. This entire proceeding is based on the fevered imaginings of a brain-injured veteran and the unpredictable behavior of a traumatized dog. There is no credible evidence linking me to any wrongdoing. Inspector General Hayes stood up, his expression grim. General Morrison, would you care to explain how Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's personal effects came to be buried at the Mountain View VA hospital? For the first time, Morrison's composure cracked slightly. I have no knowledge of any personal effects being buried anywhere. What about the communications equipment Rodriguez discovered in the target village? Equipment that she photographed before the explosion that killed her? I know nothing about any communications equipment. Hayes opened his evidence file and withdrew a series of photographs. These are the images Staff Sergeant Rodriguez transmitted to her backup server moments before her death. They show radio equipment configured to communicate with insurgent forces, along with transcripts of conversations that include specific details about upcoming patrol routes and mission parameters. As Hayes presented the evidence, Rex's agitation began to increase. The dog rose to his feet, his attention focused entirely on Morrison, as if recognizing something in the general's increasingly defensive posture. This equipment was found in a building that should have been empty according to your intelligence briefing, General Morrison. Care to explain how insurgents gained access to classified operational information? Morrison's attorney whispered urgently in his ear, but the general pushed him away. I'm not going to sit here and be accused of treason based on photographs that could have been taken anywhere, by anyone, at any time. That's when Rex made a sound that chilled everyone in the room. A keening whine that seemed to contain all. The grief and betrayal of a loyal animal who had watched his partner die because of human treachery. The sound was so mournful, so filled with accusation, that several tribunal members visibly flinched. Marcus felt his own emotions threatening to overwhelm him, as Rex's cry triggered the final, most painful memory of Operation Desert Echo, Elena. Bleeding and broken beneath the rubble, using her last breath to speak into her radio. Morrison, yes, Morrison set us up. Rex, no, Rex will remember. She used her dying words to name you, Marcus said, his voice cutting through Morrison's continued denials. Elena Rodriguez used her last breath to identify you as the traitor who killed her team. Morrison spun around to face Marcus, his composure finally cracking completely. Elena Rodriguez was a naive idealist who got herself killed by refusing to follow orders. She should have completed her sweep instead of questioning my intelligence. The admission hung in the air like a physical presence. Morrison realized his mistake immediately, but it was too late. His words had been recorded by the court reporter and witnessed by a room full of military officers. Rex's reaction was immediate and visceral. The dog began barking with such intensity that it sounded like multiple animals, his voice echoing off the conference room walls as he strained toward Morrison. But these weren't the aggressive barks of an attacking animal. They were the alert barks of a military working dog who had finally, after 3 years of frustration, succeeded in identifying a threat to his pack. My client misspoke, Colonel Pierce said desperately. He's been under tremendous stress. Your client just admitted to providing faulty intelligence that resulted in the death of Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, Inspector General Hayes interrupted. General Morrison, you are hereby placed under arrest for conspiracy, treason, and the murder of United States military personnel. As the military police moved to take Morrison into custody, he looked directly at Rex with an expression of pure hatred. That animal should have died with her, he snarled. It would have saved everyone a lot of trouble. Rex's response was to sit at attention and bark once, sharp, clear and final. The bark of a soldier who had completed his mission and delivered justice for his fallen handler. The tribunal room erupted in controlled chaos as Morrison was led. Away in restraints, still protesting his innocence despite having confessed to the entire room. Marcus knelt beside Rex, his hands shaking as he ran them through the dog's thick fur. We did it, he whispered. Elena can rest now. We got him. Rex leaned into Marcus's touch, his professional demeanor finally relaxing for the first time since they'd met. The dog's tail wagged slowly, and Marcus saw something in those dark eyes that he hadn't seen before. Peace. Dr. Chen approached them, her expression one of professional amazement. In all my years of working with military animals, I've never seen anything like what just happened. That dog carried testimony in his memory for 3 years, waiting for someone to listen to what he was trying to say. Inspector General Hayes joined them, his weathered face showing the satisfaction of a career spent pursuing justice. Mr. Sullivan, Your testimony and Rex's behavior provided the final pieces we needed to build our case against Morrison. Staff. Sergeant Rodriguez's sacrifice wasn't in vain. As they prepared to leave the tribunal room, Marcus looked back at the witness table where he and Rex had finally told Elena's story. 3 years of silence had been broken, 3 years of injustice had been corrected, and the truth that Elena had died protecting was finally free. Rex padded beside him toward the exit, no longer the anxious, traumatized animal who had been searching, desperately for someone to understand his message. He was once again a professional military working dog who had completed his mission with honor. Elena Rodriguez could finally rest in peace, knowing that her loyal partner had never forgotten his duty to protect and serve, even when that duty meant waiting 3 years for the right moment to deliver justice. What would you do if your loyal companion remembered a truth that even your own mind couldn't hold on to? This wasn't just a story about a soldier and a dog. It was a story about memory, justice, and the unwavering loyalty that can outlive even death. Rex didn't forget. He couldn't forget. And because of that, a buried truth was finally brought into the light, in a world where betrayal often goes unpunished and where trauma can silence even the most heroic voices. It was a retired military working dog who stood up and said, "I remember what you did. Now we turn to you. Tell us in the comments, do you believe dogs can remember more than we give them credit for?" Have you ever experienced a moment where an animal seemed to understand something no one else could? We want to hear your thoughts, your emotions, and your reflections. Did this story move you? Did Rex remind you of a pet, a partner, or a friend? Who was there for you in a time of crisis? Or perhaps you've served in the military or known someone who has. Maybe you understand what it means to carry wounds, physical or invisible, and how healing sometimes comes from the most unexpected places. Drop your comment below. What was the most powerful moment for you? If you were in Marcus's place, would you have trusted Rex's instincts? Do you think General Morrison got what he deserved? And most importantly, what would you have done differently? Your voice matters. Your perspective could help someone else see this story from a new light. And if you've ever felt voiceless like Marcus, or loyal like Rex, now's the time to speak. Leave a comment, like if this story touched you. Subscribe if you believe in stories that speak truth, even when the world wants silence. And remember, justice doesn't always come from courts or commanders. Sometimes it comes from a dog who never gave up on the truth.